Hopefully, this will be the last time that I have to touch on this Charlie Kirk thing in depth. Today, I want to come at it from a slightly different angle. Last time we talked, a few days ago, I spoke about this from the perspective of just sympathy itself. How the outpouring of sympathy towards Charlie Kirk and the shaming of people who do not join in that sympathy is based in really a complete ignorance and a lack of care for the lives that Charlie Kirk affected, right? And today we're going to kind of talk about that. Today I want to talk about a subject I like to call performative pacifism, as well as a general way in which performative pacifism manifests so insidiously among white people. The first of these people I will talk about is Jesse Wells, who is a singer-songwriter of the folk persuasion. Now, Jesse Wells has made multiple videos, uploaded many different covers and original songs, including about war, including about Ozempic, and about poverty as well. And he had a famously viral song about the United Health CEO and his untimely demise, so to speak, a few months ago. But Jesse Wells disappointed a lot of his more, let's say, left-leaning fans. We're going to use that terminology today for now. Because instead of critiquing someone like Charlie Kirk, who was a white supremacist, who was an extremely hateful bigot, who had extremely violent rhetoric, and incited people to violence, arguably, we'll get into it, instead of critiquing Charlie Kirk the same way he critiqued that CEO, he decided to talk about how Charlie Kirk didn't deserve to die, and how nobody deserves to die for their opinions. This is where people are like, well, he didn't deserve to die. Nobody deserves to die for their opinions, right? So what's wrong with him saying that? Well, we'll get into it, but aside from, the actual opinions that he was having and whether or not they were just opinions, where you choose to place your focus is important. Do you understand? Why is it that the lives of the people Charlie Kirk affected were not what you're focused on in this event? Why is it that when the rubber hits the road, you're not capable of putting out a message that says, hey, much as I don't want violence to occur on this level, much as I don't think he deserved to die or whatever, this guy was extremely dangerous and repugnant.
Charlie shouldn't have died.
Charlie shouldn't have died. Now, on its face, for a lot of people, such a message is so resonant, so important in very hateful and divisive times like these. This is a sentiment that I've seen echoed not just in his comment section, where you see people say, you can't hate the gun and love the gun that shot your rival, another quote from the song. You can't be kind and wish pain upon a child. Jesse, you're a bright voice in increasingly dark times. Thank you. A lot of people were so effusive with praise about this. And the reason why is because of performative pacifism. Performative pacifism, which I'm defining as pacifism, so non-violence, anti-violence even, that isn't actually well thought out and is only espoused to tell people how moral you are. A lot of people do this. They say things like, nobody deserves to die, nobody deserves to get shot, you're wishing pain upon his children by, critiquing Charlie Kirk, whatever the case might be. And they leave it at that because these things sound very reasonable, they sound very peaceable, they sound like the kind of thing a normal person would say. Whereas the kind of thing that tending to be black and brown people are saying on TikTok about anything from him deserving to die to not feeling sad about his death to just bringing attention to the visceral hate that he spread during his life, including my previous work on this. Those people seem unreasonable, outrageous. You guys just love violence. You guys are just hypocrites. You say that you're for peace and justice, but then you want people to die? Crazy talk. But the simple fact of this is that you guys are lying. You're not actually against violence. You're not. You're lying. And this is extremely disappointing from somebody like Jesse Wells, who a lot of people like and still like after this, and obviously praise, because he was pretty strong, pretty firm about, in the case of the United CEO, his life being filled with violence, and that violence ending up on his doorstep, right? He brought the attention not towards the idea of nobody deserves to die, oh, gun violence is bad, but instead towards the idea of, well, people are committing acts of violence in so many ways. And we cannot be truly anti-violence by simply covering up that track record. But in the case of somebody who is just speaking, who is just spreading opinions, it's clear that people think that that's a big difference, right? Oh, well, he's just saying that black people are prowling around killing white people in urban neighborhoods. That doesn't mean that he's actually violent, right? Now, before I even go further on this or other people, Sun Michaud, another content creator who is a linguist and who I rather like, covered this more brilliantly than I ever could.
I got a problem believing that you believe what you actually believe. And when evidence is presented to the contrary of your supposed beliefs, y'all either collapse or crash out in cognitive dissonance because you don't want to own your own beliefs. Oh, well, I'm a peace-loving pacifist who thinks that no one deserves to die, no matter how evil or vile they are. Unless, of course, you're a CEO of a predatory insurance company, in which case, the ingredients you got bake the cake. You reap what you sow. Know what I mean? You are Jesse Wells, or a Jesse Wells sycophant defending his blatant self-contradiction.
CEOs come and go, and one just went. The ingredients you got bake the cake you get. No one should be killed, no blood should be spilled. Charlie shouldn't have died. It could have been me.
Now, to be clear, I'm not promoting binary thinking. It's intelligent to be able to hold two seemingly opposed views and reconcile the differences between the two of them. But you have to own it. And when your response to scrutiny is to deny and lie, the only question is, who are you lying to? Me? Everyone else? Yourself? Or all of the above?
Sun Michaud also did a great video talking about Bob Dylan's legacy and his work to fight anti-blackness through his music, and compared that to Jesse Wells, who was hyped up by many during the time period he was on that generational run or whatever, making folk songs that people agreed with. Comparing Jesse Wells negatively to that, saying you're not even the old Bob Dylan. That's another great video that you should check out. But I wanted to show this one because it gets at the heart of exactly what's performative about a lot of y'all's pacifism. You are anti-violence when it is convenient for you to be anti-violence. You're not anti-violence when you watch violence take place on your television screen, both real and fake. You're not anti-violence when you learn about the history of the American Revolution and you've been told this is a great thing that happened, this thing that cost many lives, as well as the Civil War, as well as World War I, as well as World War II, as well as various other wars that took place since then. You don't think that that's bad, right? You don't think it's bad that, people have said this before, Hitler shot himself, right? You don't think the gun violence that took Hitler's life is a bad thing, right? But these are the questions that you actually have to ask yourself when you truly hate violence. Because if you want to get at the source of violence and stop it in actuality, then you begin to realize that violence is not just an act of shooting. Certainly not, because sometimes that act of shooting is justified in your mind, right? If somebody's committing an act of violence and you are able to stop them by having to kill them, 99% of people tend to agree, yeah, you should do that. But nobody actually has to defend that position or stand on that hill. It's just really telling when people decide to go back to that well. When people decide, oh, you know what, I'm actually anti-death. Oh, great. Oh, are you anti-death? Wow, are you against people dying? Whoa, what a bold take, right? How amazing is that? It's amazing because you can actually see, in the case of Jesse Wells, exactly how hypocritical such a stance is. But I want to show how pervasive this is because I know that this is not just Jesse Wells. Everybody knows that, right? And this is where we had to get to somebody like Moist Critical, saying things like this.
Let me be crystal clear here. I think the assassination of Charlie Kirk, everything that happened here is fucking horrible. I think it is horrific, awful. I think it is terrible. And I'm aware that some
those are all words.
people have been celebrating this. I find that to be fucking disgusting. Now,
So I also want you to notice, right? Let's rewind like a couple seconds back, right?
And I'm aware that some
people, right? So this is where the whiteness really plays a key role, right? I want you to think about this really for a second, right? So if somebody goes up to you, right, and is like, yo, some people are saying that you're actually fake. You, Caden, in the chat, or Dave GG, or Value Light in the chat. You, the viewer, watching this video, you're fake. Some people are saying that. What's the question that you ask? What question do you ask back? How do you respond? Laura Christian says, I'm not fake. But yeah, Lexi Olson. Who? Adrian Online. Who? JJMMJ. Who? Why am I fake? Who's saying that? You see content creators, white content creators, say this specifically. Some people are celebrating this.
People have been celebrating this. I find that to be fucking disgusting.
Right. So why don't you specify who you're talking about? Why don't you specify who you're talking about? For some of these folks, they'll find a specific content creator who has made a message, literally even just critiquing Charlie Kirk and say, this is the problem. You guys are the ones celebrating his death. And the problem with that is, 9 times out of 10, they're not actually celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. Merely saying what a person did in their life before they died is not equivalent to celebrating their death, right? Merely saying even, I am relieved that that person is dead, because that person was one of the many people committing acts of violence, inciting people to violence and hate towards me and my loved ones. That's not the same as I'm celebrating this death, right? But even still, if you really have such contempt, such disgust, Moist Critical, for these people that you have seen celebrating his death, why don't you specify who you're talking about? Is it a specific person? Is it, many people? What do the people look like? Because the reality is, if you have to say then, I'm seeing a lot of black content creators and brown content creators online joking about Charlie Kirk's death. Now what it sounds like you're saying is, oh, I think people who are affected by a person who is a white supremacist are actually wrong for making fun of that white supremacist in death. Right? Right. It's clear that you guys use this anonymity and this ambiguity to further bolster this, say it with me, performative pacifism. Because you never have to actually talk about who you're talking about. You never actually have to specify what the people are saying and why. You can just say there's this boogeyman out there. All of these people, I won't say what kind of people, I won't say why they might think this, why they might feel this way, but all these people, they're celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. What you do is you incite people, first of all, if you have a large audience, to go out and find anybody that they can pin that on and harass those people. But this is what people do. This is what white people do, specifically. Because you're not actually thinking about people, specifically, and thinking with any empathy of why they might be reacting a certain way that makes you uncomfortable. And because your first instinct is to say, well, I'm uncomfortable, so I'm going to go out and condemn people. I'm going to shame people for their reactions. I'm going to accuse them of doing things that may not even be fair because I'm uncomfortable. What that makes you is an asshole. It makes you, in many cases, a bigot. And it makes you, at the very least, a person who does not know how to sit with discomfort. Because you could ask people, right? If this was something that made you uncomfortable, you could make a post saying, hey, I don't understand. I don't know much about this Charlie Kirk guy. And he goes on to say that, right? He goes on to say, I don't know much about this Charlie Kirk guy.
Now, as I said on stream, I don't know much about Charlie Kirk.
He doesn't know much about Charlie Kirk. So, an empathetic person might go on and say, hey, I don't know much about this person. It's making me uncomfortable that people are celebrating his death. Can somebody let me know why that might be the case, or whether or not that's actually what people are doing? But no, you don't do that, right? The first thing that you do before you actually express any of that empathy that you are performing is, I condemn this. You are awful. This is horrific. This is disgusting. Do you know why? Because you don't actually have the empathy that you say you have. You don't actually care about violence the way that you say you care about violence, because you don't investigate it. You don't think about it. And you don't put yourself in any position of vulnerability in that quest. All you do is, when it's convenient for you, say, I'm against violence. There's one point here that I forgot to make in the live that I'll just make now. There's this particular way that people praise this take from Moist Critical and others about being against violence as being like normal. Oh, this is the normal take. And wow, it speaks volumes that these people are attacking you for having such a normal take. Like, oh, non-violence is good, violence is bad, or whatever. So I want to make the point really quickly that like normal opinions are not necessarily good. In the 30s, it was normal in many liberal democracies in Europe to be like, this Hitler guy is fine. You know, I'm just saying, most of the takes that we consider normal 10, 20, 30 years from now, we'll look back and be like, that was not cool. Why did people think that way? And really, the way people thought, it was shaped by the normalcy of it. People thought that way because it was normal. Now, I am not somebody who is a biographer of this guy Charlie Moist Critical, whatever. I don't know his work that well. I know people say that he's a perpetual fence sitter. There's been people on TikTok that have been roasting him for this. Visiting a farm with Moist Critical, but he sees a fence for him to sit on. I don't know if there's been instances where he's made light of or enjoyed or celebrated violence. But I can tell you that it is very normalized for people to celebrate the violence that occurs all the time at the hands of our own military, our own cops, at the hands of people who we put in charge of dominating the violence. So you can't actually be really anti-violence if you are pro-cop. As Sun Michaud kind of outlined, right? You say you're anti-violence, but you go to an event and you're famous and you've got security and that security is armed. You know, you say you're anti-gun, but you celebrate the achievements of the United States in World War II. Does that not give you pause, right? Were those not human lives being taken? You know, human lives in Japan, in Germany, in Italy. Do you think everybody that got killed in the Revolutionary War was a combatant? Unwritten says, yeah, it goes to show where a majority of empathy lies in America. There is empathy, just not for very specific groups. But this is exactly why it's performative. And what's interesting about performativity, right? And this is a term that I've said I don't like to use, but I've recently used it to describe these kinds of reactions. The reason that people call things performative most of the time is because they have this idea in their head that somebody's intentionally faking the way that they feel in order to receive some sort of benefit, right? Now, I don't think that that's the case all the time. I think a lot of the times we're performative about things and we're not even cognizant that we're being performative, okay? If you've never had a moment in your life where you've been called out on something and realized, oh shit, I am not standing on business. I am not about this thing like I say I'm about. Your conscience is probably not working as well as you think it is, right? Because that's how we grow, is through self-critique. That's how we grow, is by recognizing we have certain values and then constantly putting those values through fire, putting those values through arduous kind of skepticism and criticism, because we care about those values, right? So we want to get them right. But you guys don't do that same thing to your ideas of violence. You don't hold them up to any skepticism, which means you don't actually stand on them, even though you think you do. You might not think you're faking it. You might be very earnest. I have no doubt that someone like Jesse Wells and someone like Moist Critical is very earnest in what they're saying, okay? But that actually makes it almost worse, because you know what it is? It's that a lot of the times it's people who are well-meaning who get other people killed. It's people who mean well, who have very sweet thoughts and think of themselves as good people, that often are the most dangerous. Because that lack of questioning means that the moment that something comes that they have to think about and then they don't think about it, they won't think about it because they think they're a good person. That makes it all the more dangerous. Now, I still don't doubt, right, that these people in their heart of hearts think that they are anti-violence. But that doesn't mean that it's not performative. You know, we perform things a lot. And sometimes we perform things in ways that are almost intentional. Like we perform gender, right? Through that awareness, that self-awareness, we then allow that performance of gender to be healthy and to reflect a lot of different vulnerable and honest things. But it's still a performance at the end of the day, right? Why I use the term performative is because you're subconsciously focused on getting a reaction from people, getting a good positive reaction and being put on a particular pedestal. That's your focus. You don't notice it, but that's where you're actually focused, right? Because the only reason why you, as a nonviolent person, as an empathetic person, would speak these things out loud without asking anybody, without thinking critically about it, without thinking twice about it, and say these very obvious things, like capital O obvious shit. Nobody has ever said, yeah, actually I'm pro-death, right? Unless they're being ironic. Nobody has ever been like, yeah, you know what? All violence is good, right? Celebrating death, right? It's very easy to sit around and say, I'm actually so against celebrating death. I'm super against that. I'm super against violence. Those are easy things to say, but they're very hard things to actually stand on. You know, if you actually care about violence, what you do is you think about violence a lot, and you think about whether or not you might be complicit in violence. And you think about, like, what is violence beyond just inflicting violence in the most direct way? Aren't there a lot of ways in which violence happens where you can say that it's not somebody's fault, but it really is? If I kick my son out of the house for being gay, and my son then is homeless and then gets assaulted, or worse, what I did was violent. Even though I didn't hit my son, what I did was endanger my son, put them in a situation where my son could not defend himself. My son was without resources and protection. My son was alone. And violence was perpetuated against my son. And I can sit around and say, nobody deserves for that to happen. But I am the reason it happened in many different ways. So if you care about violence, these are the things you're thinking about. And so things that happen in Gaza, things that happen to black people every day, to brown people every day, things that happen to white people, frankly, every day. There's a lot of violence that happens to white people that they don't even acknowledge, okay? A lot of y'all white people have been going through a lot of stuff, and you do not acknowledge it. And that's part of the reason why all this bad stuff keeps happening. We'll get into that another day. When you really care about nonviolence, then you have to go through the hard work of making yourself vulnerable. But frankly, this is something that people don't ever want to do. I am a, let's say, eclectic, syncretistic Buddhist. Okay? I'm Buddhist. I try to follow Buddhist mores, but I have also a lot of different divergences in how I think. A lot of that because, like, there's stuff in Buddhism, especially in how Buddhism is practiced in today's day and age, that I'm like, you guys are missing the point. Like, case in point, if you go onto the Buddhism subreddit, right, and you ask Buddhists, what should I do about, like, Palestine? It's killing me inside that this genocide is occurring. You'll have Buddhists that are like, that's a thought. That's a concept, right? And those thoughts can just go, right? You have Buddhists that are like, you're attaching yourself to an idea that this is a genocide. Perhaps you need to understand the opinion of an Israeli who is attached to a different idea, that it's actually a super justified war. And then you should come together. When it comes to actually doing something about a lot of the violence that actually occurs, because it is too controversial, and because they've dug themselves into this very zero tolerance hole of, I'm against all violence, you're actually more pro-violence than a lot of people who don't call themselves anti-violent. Because you sit back and you allow the abuser to abuse. You sit back and you allow the Nazi to spread hate. You allow the Nazi to violate and kill and injure. The reality of life, unfortunately, you can't run from it. There's going to be contradictions. There's going to be points where you're like, this is kind of hypocritical in a way, or people are not going to understand where I'm coming from at all. But through the critical thought that I've applied and the feelings that I have, the empathy that I have, I'm going to make this decision. And maybe I might regret it later. And a lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people avoid not only controversy externally, but they avoid internal controversy. They love to think that if you just plant a flag of I'm of zero tolerance against this, and you just stand by it with a blindfold on, oh, I'm always against violence, I'm always against violence, I'm always against violence, that will save you from having to think critically. That will save you from having to read a fucking book. I don't have to read books. I'm against violence. What do I need to learn? What do I need to learn? I'm against violence. Then you read the book finally one day because you know what, maybe I'll read the book. And you realize, oh shit, I commit a lot of violence. I am super complicit in tons of violence. And the fact that I wasn't able to challenge myself on it meant I was violent. Like extra violent. I'm the only person of color in my family, and this time has been very enlightening and hurtful. LOL. I'm so sorry, Unwritten. Honestly, like that's a really hard thing to go through. And just know that there's a lot of community out there, and there's a lot of ancestors behind you that can help guide you to figure out what you need to do. The craziest thing, says Ivy, was when we were talking about Palestine in uni with our teacher, and one of the students said, I'm against all wars. Like, okay, and it's not going to help. But that's exactly it, right, Ivy? Because why would you say I'm against all wars? You know, that's a Jesse Wells song, right? These are the things that preempted his Charlie Kirk take. He has a song about the people that die in war. It's an anti-war song. Okay, so you're anti-war, right? What are you actually doing to stop war? Nothing. Okay, so you recognize that war builds empires, right? And you live in that empire, right? And you're not doing anything to stop the war that's taking place in that empire, right? So how are you anti-war? The iPhone conversation, you hate capitalism, but you have an iPhone. It doesn't make sense, not because these aren't contradictions, but because it takes courage to actually look your contradictions in the face and make decisions about what you can do about these values, what you can do to stand by these values despite the contradictions. It takes courage to do that. And a coward is the kind of person who goes up to you and says, yeah, you're anti-capitalism, but you have an iPhone, so ha. In this case, though, when it comes to violence, when you're the one saying, I have a non-contradictory position, my position is clear, my position is, it's totally great, there are no contradictions in it. Now that's when I say, okay, but there are like several. That's when that conversation becomes important. You guys see that, right? So for somebody like Penguins, right? Moist Critical, if he were saying, you know, I want to be a non-violent person, but I recognize that there's a lot of violence in the world that I often benefit from or I'm complicit in, and life is way too complicated to just say I'm anti-violence, right? Or I'm against celebrating death, right? When I've celebrated violence before, I've celebrated death before. So I'm trying to figure out how I can best position myself to reduce the violence that currently exists. And hopefully the work that I do can pass on to the next generation to continue to reduce it. If that's what Charlie was saying, right? Moist Critical was saying, then I'd be like, okay, yeah. Like I totally get where you're coming from. But because you're so wedded to the idea like, oh yeah, I already have the position, it's against violence, so I see this violence happening, I'm like, that's bad. It's just very obvious that you're going to contradict yourself, and you're not going to reckon with it. You're going to just live with that cognitive dissonance, and it's going to harm a lot of people, including yourself.